Welcome to a video on HelloID Provisioning, and I'd like to talk about all the tabs and settings that we see when configuring an on-premise Active Directory target system. So let's see, we have the general tab here, and if you create a new target system, this tab will be the only one visible, and then you enter your FQDN and you say connect, and then all the rest of the tabs will appear. Now, the interesting one here is that you can override the domain controller selection if you would like that. Otherwise, it will be on automatic. So if you have multiple sites or slow links, then this is the one to use here. You can also say what kind of agent would you like to service all the provisioning requests. I have only one agent, so that's easy for me. Now move on to Exchange. You can do Exchange integration, and Exchange integration uses remote PowerShell. So basically you don't need to install the entire Exchange client on the same machine as the one that runs the HelloID provisioning agent. You just want to make sure that you have at least one Exchange client access server which does have remote PowerShell enabled. And usually what you end up with is yeah, something like this. Now by default, this PowerShell virtual directory on your IIS server in Exchange, it is enabled, but it's not Active Directory. The Windows authentication is probably disabled, so you'd have to enable that. Make sure that you do a username and password that can be obviously separate from your HelloID provisioning agent. So your HelloID provisioning agent, the account, doesn't have to be an Exchange administrator. You can just specify a different account here. Sometimes you may need to choose a different authentication mode. That's all depending on your configuration. Now, if this one is a proper domain name, you can leave these buttons, these toggles here disabled. But if it's like an internal server, well, you can't do SSL on an IP address or a server name. So you'd have to do these ones. And this one is the interesting one. It basically decides if we want to do an enable remote mailbox or just an enable mailbox. Now, in the mode that it's currently on, the toggle is disabled, it will use enable mailbox. So that's a hybrid deployment where you create a local Exchange mailbox. If you enable it, then it will be a remote Exchange integration. So it will do a enable remote mailbox. And then you obviously need to specify this, which is a toggle that has been a setting that has been added a couple of releases ago. So this is for the Exchange configuration. Let's move on to the directories. Directories, we can enable each of those different tiles with its own switch, and then we can say, okay, we do the regular setup like a home server and a share, and you don't need to do this like a SAM account name or something. This don't do that. It will be automatically added. That's what it says here. So just do it like this. If you go over this, the path should have the following format. So only include the path, the parent path, and the SAM account name will be automatically created here. The home drive, the archive path, you cannot specify the permissions here, which are default. So if you use PowerShell, you can influence or you can decide for yourself the settings that you just saw here. It will not take over the creation of the home directory, mind you. So this is not a replacement for the creation of the home directory. It just uses PowerShell to dynamically decide or impact the values here. And you can see that here, if you use PowerShell, it will just says, okay, I want to export using PowerShell these configuration settings. So it's not a creation, it's just the configuration is then handled by PowerShell, not the creation. All right. So if you want custom ACLs or custom NTFS permissions, then you need to disable this completely and create your own target connector for that. Moving on to account, well, there's a different video on that, on the account mapping. So please watch that if you want to have more information on this. The administration. This is basically a global settings. For instance, your containers. Now this one is always required. You need to have an initial container where the account is created, and then you can optionally say, okay, when the account is enabled, move it to somewhere else. On disable and an update, you can also move it to somewhere else. And then you can, those containers, you can optionally override the default or a single value and use PowerShell to dynamically determine the value. So let's say if you have different locations or sites or departments in your HR system, you can use PowerShell to dynamically calculate or determine the OU. I would advise to keep it as simple as possible. I mean, in Azure, Microsoft is no longer doing OUs. Everything is group-based, which is a more flexible approach. So also, this one is very important because this decides what happens when you revoke the account permission. What happens? If we do this when revoking the account permission, the account will be deleted. If we do this, then the account will not be deleted, but it will just remain in disabled state. So you can clean it up manually. We usually leave it at this. And this is the updating of the manager field in Active Directory. And the manager field is a special attribute which requires the use of the distinguished name. And it's handled by this one. So you don't do that in the account mapping, but you do that here. And this is a very useful one to set, especially if you use HelloID Service Automation, where the workflow system heavily depends on the relationship between an employee and its manager. So you might want to have this enabled here, so that HelloID Provisioning can properly set the manager relationship on accounts. Now, entitlements. In which business rule is this system included as an entitlement? You can see that here. Thresholds. Very important, very important. This is a guard system, like a safety net, when enabling this in your business rules. And for instance, I would always advise setting these values to especially the revoke, to a very low one. Here it's set to a percentage. When going live or doing testing, I would even say set it to this value. The values that were previously in this field are for a system that is already live. So this is more for testing. This makes sure that every revoke is blocked and that you approve it manually. So it's like a traffic light. And that's very convenient, so you don't accidentally, if you make a mistake in your business rules and something gets revoked, it won't be processed automatically. So make sure this always is enabled, the revokes and maybe the updates as well. Grants are usually less impactful because there will only be more accounts and more stuff in your Active Directory, which you can easily delete. The correlation, we have a different video on that, on the correlation and the report. And then the audit logs, obviously. This will show the all the executions that are passed through this system. So you can view it from a person's perspective, and this is from a system's perspective. You see all the grants, you see updates, moves, enables, and this is basically your audit log for your system. Alright, that's it for the configuration tabs on your on-premise Active Directory system. Thanks for watching.